One of these films got bomb threats on opening night. Another one got so completely destroyed by Star Wars that it bankrupted an entire distribution company. And yet Tarantino says these are the only 10 films from the 70s you need to see. Tarantino has this theory about 70s cinema. He thinks the whole new Hollywood experiment almost died in 1970 before it even got going. It was fragile, it could have collapsed, and if two specific movies hadn't worked that year, we never would have gotten The Exorcist or The Godfather. One of those movies was MASH, the other was 5 Easy Pieces. This was the film that showed everyone what Jack Nicholson could do. He'd been working for years, but only hardcore film nerds knew who he was. 5 Easy Pieces changed that overnight. Nicholson plays Bobby, a guy who was a piano prodigy as a kid, but grew into a complete disaster of an adult. He works on an oil rig now, lives with his girlfriend, and when he finds out his dad is dying, he takes a road trip to see him. And Bobby is just not a good person. He treats his girlfriend like garbage, cheats on her, makes fun of her constantly, has sex with his brother's girlfriend. He's emotionally stunted and can't really connect with anyone. The movie doesn't even have a traditional plot. You're mostly just watching this unlikable guy drift through his life. It's basically the most 70s movie ever made. Tarantino considers it one of the films that made the entire decade possible. Richard Harris had one demand when he signed on to this movie. He wanted to become the chief of the Sioux Indians by the end. The film is about a British aristocrat who gets captured by the Sioux in 1825. At first, they treat him like an animal, drag him around naked, call him horse. But over time, he proves himself through a series of brutal rituals and eventually becomes one of them. There's this initiation scene where they put eagle claws through the guy's chest, and Tarantino said that scene blew his mind. But the movie was incredibly controversial. The American Indian movement was furious about it. They said the film invented rituals that had no basis in reality, and they called Richard Harris a Tarzan for the red people. When it opened in Minneapolis, protesters physically blocked people from getting to the box office. There was an actual bomb threat, and the fire department had to investigate. The studio had been showing the film to native audiences for free, but they stopped because they thought it was creating backlash. But of course, all that controversy just made people curious. The film ended up making $6 million, which would be around $50 million today. Enough to spawn 2 sequels, with Harris coming back in 1976 and again in 1983. John Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon made this as a student film at University of Southern California, and somehow it turned into an actual feature release. It's a sci-fi comedy about a small crew stuck on a spaceship for 20 years, alone in deep space, and everything starts going hilariously wrong. There's even a fight scene with an alien that's obviously just a beach ball, which was totally intentional. Carpenter was paying tribute to those cheap 50s monster movies with rubber creatures running around. Carpenter knew he had no money to compete with A Space Odyssey, but he also hated that movie's religious overtones. So he went completely the other direction. He wanted to make something grimy and real, asking questions like how do you clean your underwear when you're on a spaceship? Tarantino called it a science fiction masterpiece, not just a good little movie, a genuine counterculture, anti-establishment, hippie filmmaking masterpiece. Pretty impressive for something that started as a student project with no budget. Jack Hill built his career making exploitation films. He's the guy who turned Pam Grier into a star with Coffee and Foxy Brown. Switchblade Sisters was supposed to be another winner for him. It's about an all-female gang. New girl moves into the neighborhood, disrupts the group, violence follows, standard exploitation setup. But Hill had bigger plans. He'd always dreamed of adapting Othello, and this was his version of it. He even worked in Ayn Rand as a philosophical reference point. So you've got this $200,000 drive-in movie with more literary ambition than most studio releases. And it bombed completely. Lost so much money Hill couldn't find work for years after that. Then Tarantino found it. He'd been working as a video store clerk, watching everything he could get his hands on. He discovered Switchblade Sisters and fell in love with it. Years later, after he got famous, he re-released the film under his Rolling Thunder Pictures label and said, "If you like my stuff, this is where mine came from." He loved the dialogue so much he said you could flip to any page of the script and find something great. The movie ended up directly inspiring Elle Driver in Kill Bill. That whole eye patch character came straight from Switchblade Sisters. There's a revenge movie from 1977 that Tarantino loved so much he spent 10 years chasing it around Los Angeles. This was before home video was really a thing. If you wanted to see Rolling Thunder, you had to find a theater playing it. So Tarantino would track down wherever it was showing and just go. For a decade. Same movie, over and over again. When he finally got the chance to start his own distribution company, he named it Rolling Thunder Pictures. The movie was written by Paul Schrader, the same guy who wrote Taxi Driver, and Schrader saw them as companion pieces. Taxi Driver was the psychological portrait. Rolling Thunder was the action version. Same dark territory, different approach. It's about a Vietnam vet who comes home and can't adjust. Something terrible happens to him and his family, and the last act of the movie is pure violent payback. Tarantino called it the greatest savage, fascist, revenge-o-matic flick ever made. He said most movies let you down, but Rolling Thunder is ass-kicking Nirvana. The problem was that people weren't ready for it. When they first screened it for audiences, director John Flynn said they almost got killed at a preview in San Jose. There's this scene involving a garbage disposal that had people so horrified they were ready to riot. The violence was just too extreme for 1977. The movie bombed at the box office. Budget was around $5 million and it made $130,000 before they pulled it from theaters. So here's something about Robert Altman that changes how you watch MASH. Before he was a filmmaker, he was a bomber pilot in World War II. Enlisted at 18, flew more than 50 combat missions over the Pacific in a B-24. Actually saw people die from the sky. And when he got out and eventually started making movies, he carried this intense hatred of military bullshit with him. MASH came out in 1970, and even though it's set during the Korean War, Altman was making a Vietnam movie. Vietnam was still happening when he shot it. The whole thing is about Army surgeons a few miles from the front lines dealing with an endless stream of wounded bodies. And the only way these guys can cope is by getting drunk and pulling pranks and acting like lunatics. Fox had no idea what they had. They were busy worrying about their prestige projects that year, Patton and Tora. MASH was this weird thing they weren't paying attention to. Executives wanted to cut the surgery scenes because they thought all the blood was too much. Then it came out and became one of the biggest hits of 1970. Won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay, spawned one of the most successful TV shows in history. And Altman hated that TV show, absolutely despised it. He said he never watched a single episode all the way through and didn't like anyone involved with it. Tarantino didn't like the show either, and he and Altman actually didn't get along personally. Tarantino said straight up that Altman didn't like him and he didn't like Altman, but he loves the movie. He says even though it takes place in Korea, it was the first movie to truly deal with the dilemma of Vietnam. But it was also a service comedy like no other. It's awash in blood and deals with the meat grinder aspect of war. Tarantino calls this his favorite Western of the entire decade, and a lot of that comes down to the script by Alan Sharp, who's one of Tarantino's favorite writers. Burt Lancaster plays a scout helping the cavalry track down a small group of Apaches who've left the reservation. There's this young lieutenant who wants to give the Apaches the benefit of the doubt because of his Christian beliefs, and Lancaster's character is just watching this guy make mistake after mistake, knowing exactly how bad things are going to get. This isn't one of those big, heroic cavalry westerns with John Wayne speeches. It's small and mean. A frustrated chase against an enemy that's better at this than the soldiers are. And the film actually tries to get into why the Apaches are doing what they're doing, which most movies at the time didn't bother with. Lancaster wanted this movie made so badly that he basically became an uncredited producer on it. Instead of taking his usual upfront salary, he took a percentage. helped push it through production, had a say in the editing. Director Robert Aldrich shot the whole thing in 7 weeks on about $1.2 million. That's 3 or 4 weeks faster than he usually worked, and he privately said he wasn't totally happy with how it turned out. It also attracted some controversy. Even though Lancaster was known for supporting liberal causes, the way the film portrayed Native Americans got criticized as racist by some people. But Tarantino thinks it's great. He says what makes it special is that it's not just a Western, it's Aldrich combining Westerns with war films, which were the 2 genres he was most known for. And according to Tarantino, it's the best thing Aldrich did in the whole decade. This is the one that got destroyed by Star Wars. William Friedkin had just made The Exorcist. He was one of the biggest directors in Hollywood, and he decided his next project would be a remake of The Wages of Fear. 4 desperate men driving trucks full of unstable dynamite through a jungle in Latin America. The production nearly killed everyone involved. 50 crew members ended up hospitalized or sent home with injuries, gangrene, tropical diseases. Friedkin himself lost 50 pounds and caught malaria. He later called it the hardest film he ever made. Sorcerer finally came out in June 1977, 1 month after Star Wars, and Star Wars obliterated it. When Sorcerer took over the screen at Mann's Chinese Theater, people stopped showing up. The theater actually had to crawl back to Paramount and ask to get Star Wars again, just so they'd have an audience. Sorcerer needed about $45 million to break even. It made 9. Meanwhile, Star Wars made over $500 million. Even the editor looked at Star Wars and told Friedkin it made their movie look like amateurish pieces. The failure was so total that it actually bankrupted the distribution company handling it in Argentina. But Friedkin never stopped loving it. He said every other film he made, he'd want to change something. But not Sorcerer. He wouldn't touch a single frame. When they restored and re-released it in 2014, critics finally caught up with it. Tarantino's always been a believer. He calls the bridge sequence one of the great suspense moments in cinema history. And everything in that scene was real. No special effects, they actually did it. And then there's Jaws, which probably doesn't need me to explain what it is, but Tarantino says something interesting about it. He makes a distinction between the greatest film ever made and the greatest movie ever made, and Jaws, in his view, is the greatest movie ever made. He said there's no better than Jaws, and that watching it showed how badly timed most movies before it were. $9 million budget, $476 million at the box office, first summer blockbuster in history. Before Jaws, studios put their big releases out in winter. This movie came out in June 1975 and changed the whole industry's calendar. Plus, it was one of the first films to get a huge TV advertising campaign, which made seeing it feel like an event. Shark terrorizes a beach town. 3 guys on a boat try to kill it, simple as that. And 50 years later, people are still scared to go in the ocean. This one's an Australian martial arts movie, which sounds like an odd combination, and it absolutely was. Brian Trenchard Smith directed it, and Jimmy Wang Yu, he's like Asia's Steve McQueen, starred as a Hong Kong detective who comes to Sydney to take down a crime lord. The whole thing is this wild East meets West mashup, with martial arts fights breaking out across the Australian landscape. The movie threw everything together: police procedurals, spy thrillers, westerns, martial arts action. It had life-threatening stunts that would later influence Mad Max. It had Bond-style set pieces. It also had some pretty casual racism because it was the 70s. Tarantino's take on it was pretty straightforward. He said this movie kicks ass. That's pretty much all you need to know about it.